The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
I have to admit, I know it only ended on Friday, but it feels like the season's been over forever. Probably for a couple of reasons now, come to think of it, as I start to say it out loud. My initial thought was that I was going to begin this podcast by talking about how it feels like the season ended a month ago because Friday feels like a long time back. But now I'm thinking that it feels like it ended a month ago because we sort of knew what was going to happen. So I guess it's a double whammy. In any event, the NBA season officially came to an end on Friday evening. The Cavaliers, down 3-0, knew that they were buried, and so they just went ahead and started shoveling dirt on themselves. Came out flat. Warriors had an easy time of things. They just sort of floated their way through that ball game. I mean, the end was a foregone conclusion, and I was actually kind of pleased with the NBA Twitter sphere because they didn't clobber the Cavs for coming out with a sort of a zero effort in that last game. I think they had a little gusto in the first quarter, and that was about it. Right? Like, what would the point of dogpiling? Or piling on, I should say. What would be the point of piling on the Cavs at that stage? We all knew they were done. They knew they were done. And it just seemed like one of those moments where someone out there would have been looking for a reason to clobber them. And it really wasn't a storyline. People got this one right. That the finals were sort of over before they began. Cleveland had a chance to steal one in game 1. J.R. Smith, bonehead, so on and so forth. We know how the rest of that series went. We did find out after that LeBron James basically blasted his hand apart, punching a blackboard after game 1, which is a very Kevin Brown move, if you remember the big, roided-out baseball right-hander who, I think it was socked a dugout wall, if I'm not mistaken, shattered his hand. It's not the first instance in history of somebody hurting themselves doing something dumb, but certainly, for LeBron, who put up 50 whatever in game 1 to give his team a chance to win, and then just sort of didn't have the ability to space the floor after that because his shot wasn't right. He didn't tell anybody about it, but I mean, without LeBron at 100%, then it wasn't even really competitive. So it's over. Now we are officially into the offseason. We fantasy folks have been in our offseason for 2 months already. The NBA season, as usual, takes almost exactly 2 months from the end of the regular season. I think, what did the season end on? The 11th this year? It was the 11th or the 12th. So it would be about 2 months to today. So it did end just under 2 months after the end of the regular season, and that was only because we got a sweep in the finals. If the finals went 5 games, well, then it would have ended, yesterday? Game 5 would have been Sunday? I don't know. I forget. In any event, if the finals were competitive, we would have gone over 2 months of playoff basketball. That is too long. I complain about this every year. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to change anything. My irritated ramblings on a podcast are not going to change how the NBA playoffs go. But 2 months is so long. I don't mind. Okay, so here's the thing. And then I'm going to actually introduce the show and get into some important stuff. I don't mind the fact that you've got 16 teams in the playoffs. I actually don't. I don't think you need to eliminate a round. I think it's good. It creates a certain measure of competitive balance. Teams that are fighting for the 8th seed are probably going to get waxed early in the playoffs. But think about this year, where in the Western Conference, the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Denver Nuggets were fighting for the 8th seed. Those are good teams that if they weren't playing the Warriors or Rockets or whoever right out of the chute, they'd had a decent chance to go somewhere. I don't mind that there are 16 teams. I mind that we have to wait so long, especially as the playoffs get farther along. At least in the early round, when you've got 8 different games going on at any given moment, They can do 3 or 4 games a day, and you've still got an interesting NBA schedule every single day. As you get into the conference finals, and you're down to 2 games, and then the finals, obviously, you just have 1 matchup going on, and you've got these 2-day breaks. It drags, man. You can't be... we got to just... I get it. 30, 40, 50 years ago, whatever it was, travel was a pain in the butt. And for regular Joes like myself, travel still sucks. Travel is miserable. I hate security lines. I hate checking bags and waiting at the gate and boarding groups and boarding a plane 45 minutes before the flight time and then just sitting there in people's sweat and hot air. That's the worst. But guess what? These guys don't deal with that. They got a charter plane they hop on. They roll right into the airport and boom, off they go. Travel's not hard. They get served delicious foods if they want them. Delightful drinks, beverages of whatever shape and size they can imagine. I'm sure that every seat in these planes has a port where they can plug in every mobile device they can think of. It's luxury, man. Travel's not hard. So 2 days off between games, fine, you want your superstars to be healthy. But you know what? Figure out a way to get healthy with 1 day off in between things. We gotta shorten these. Even if that just knocks off a week, it's something. Anyway. I'd also be okay with turning the first round into a best of 5, and I think everybody right now would be very much okay with deconferencing the playoffs. And I know in a perfect world, you'd just take the top 16 teams overall. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I'm also fine with taking the top 8 teams from both conferences, which does allow a little bit of a, we can sneak in the crummy conference thing. But, and, we can look back at this year's schedule or standings and results to see how this would have played out. A team like the Wizards at 43-39, who had to play the Raptors in the opening round, I guess that wouldn't have changed a whole lot, right? If you're at the bottom, you're going to play a team at the top. But if you're a team like, the Miami Heat at 44-38, who are a 6th seed in the Eastern Conference, would not have made the playoffs in the Western Conference. So every one of those Western Conference teams would have drawn a different matchup. Here's who it really helps. It helps a team like the Timberwolves. Right? Or the Spurs or the Pelicans. The bottom seeds in the Western Conference that actually would have been kind of middle of the pack in the playoffs overall. Where would the T-Wolves have been? At 47-35. The Pacers were ahead of them, so 5 teams in the East and 7 teams in the West. So they would have been, 13, 14 seed? That would have gotten them away from the Rockets and Warriors. The Wizards, the Bucks, the Heat. Those 3 teams would have drawn the top 3 teams overall, which would have been Rockets, Raptors, and Warriors. Poor Milwaukee. I think the Bucks would have had to play the Warriors in the first round there. But then the Timberwolves would have drawn Trailblazers or Celtics. I think it would have been the Celtics. And I get it. Boston ended up beating some teams, but you don't think the Wolves would have had a better chance against the Celtics than the Rockets? Absolutely. The Spurs, they drew the 76ers. That'd be kind of a unfortunate twist. The Pelicans, they ended up beating the Trailblazers in the first round. They would have had the Cavaliers instead. Lucky you guys. Jazz, they ended up winning their matchup. Thunder drew the Jazz in the first round. That would have been different. Although not by much. Still put you right in the middle of the pack. Anyway, so, it's a thing that doesn't really help the middle pack teams as well. Let me rephrase that. When I say middle pack, I mean the teams that are seeded in the middle of the pack, not the teams that have the middle record. It helps a team that sneaks in a really tough division, and it probably hurts a team that is in the crummier one. In general, it should hurt the teams in the Eastern Conference, and it should help the teams out West because maybe they can avoid playing Rockets or Warriors for a round longer. There's the short version. This is Fantasy NBA Today, a hoopball presentation. I'm Dan Besbris, rocking it solo this Monday morning. We had a little bit of a different schedule this week. Get that to you here right out of the chute. Due to some travel, our good buddy Adrian Benjamins will be out of town late this week. Adrian and myself will be on tomorrow's podcast, so you'll get your two co-hosts. Wednesday, it'll be Adrian and Neil. Thursday, you'll have Neil and me. And then Friday, you got me going solo here to finish up the week. Next week, we'll go back to the same schedule as last week, and that's one we'll probably be using for the foreseeable future. I love it. Really an opportunity here to, I don't want to say introduce anymore because you know them now, Adrian and Neil. They're not being introduced to you anymore, but it's an opportunity for you guys to get to know them much better. The offseason plays a critical role. Well, now that we don't have any betting to talk about, I think the shows are actually going to get a little bit shorter for the first time ever. I keep promising it and I never deliver, but now I almost don't know how I couldn't deliver. Because we got one thing and one thing alone to do right now, and you guys know I don't know jack bleep about the NBA draft. I am, as I've said before, the Rick Carlisle of the fantasy world. I don't play my rookies. Wasn't that a Larry Brown thing at one point, too? I don't play my rooks. Phil Jackson. So I just don't really learn much about them. I'll let somebody else overdraft a rookie because generally you get one rookie, and this year we had two, which was the over, basically. I think Vegas would set the line at 1.5 every year. You pretty much have one that makes a difference for a substantial period of time in an NBA season. Usually it's the transcendent, no doubt about it, number one overall guy like a Karl Anthony Towns or an Anthony Davis, whoever it might be in this particular respect. This year you had Jason Tatum, who turned out to be much better than people realized, and you ended up with Donovan Mitchell after about a month and change, 2 months where he was sort of getting his bearings. But that was basically it. Lonzo Ball could have made a difference if his percentages were better or he had played more basketball games. And then, you got all these other point guards that everybody thought were going to be great, and they were clunkers. And they might be good NBA players, by the way, not to rule that out. But rookies have problems that are tough to overcome. Donovan Mitchell was able to overcome it because he is, well, one, very good, and also two, the injuries in Utah freed up a massive ball handling role. For Jason Tatum, he fit in perfectly. Everything that he did was right exactly what Boston needed. He was able to refine certain skills that made a lot of sense, and he just didn't screw things up. His percentages were good. That's not something you usually see out of rookies. So I'll let somebody else take flyers on these guys because usually the hype machine is coming in so hot on rooks that you have to draft them higher than you ought to. And the surprise ones here, right? The surprise, the Donovan Mitchells, the Jason Tatums, they were largely undrafted. The rookies that got drafted, Lonzo, Dennis Smith Jr., etc., De'Aaron Fox, kind of wet farts, the three of them. Lonzo, the closest to being a thing. All that to say, we're not going to really spend much time on the draft other than recapping it after it happens. So right now, we're talking about teams and teams alone. My buddies Adrian and Neil wrapped up the Southeast Division, so we're going Central now as we roll our way north in the contiguous United States. And this is a team I've been waiting. It's the 21st team we're covering here, but it's one that I've wanted to do since day one, the Indiana Pacers. 48-34 this season. Winning records both at home and on the road. Winning record within the division and within the conference. A strong 5 seed from a team that was expected to be hot garbage. The Pacers were expected to win. Yes, the Vegas line set at 31.5. I got this one right, by the way. I had this one as the over, although I sort of got it right for the wrong reasons. I thought they'd get the over. I thought they would make it over by a little bit because I thought that if anybody got hurt on this team, they'd be in real trouble. They proved me wrong. Miles Turner played this year mostly hurt, and it really didn't take them out of their rhythm all that much. Because Victor Oladipo, Darren Collison, and Thad Young were just awesome. Were awesome, slightly less awesome, and very good, respectively, I should say. Bojan Bogdanovic, who is just the sleepiest fantasy player on earth, was actually relatively useful for them, despite Glenn Robinson III missing the entire season. Corey Joseph, solid contributor off the bench. He filled in admirably when Darren Collison was out. They got a lot out of Domantas Sabonis, who filled in when Miles Turner was out. And then, the key cogs, Thad Young, Darren Collison, who did miss a couple of weeks in there, but Victor Oladipo and Thad Young in particular, they were very healthy. They were solid. They were a healthy team this year. So overall, it wasn't necessarily that the team was perfectly healthy. Nobody ever is. But the most important guy on their team played 75 games. And that's important. I would argue the third most important guy on their team is that Miles Turner really didn't play many games at all. 65. Darren Collison had a top 50 fantasy season. He played 69 games, also not that great. Thad Young, and this is something we talked about, played 81 games. He is a titan of durability. He broke his wrist last year, and what did he miss? Like 3 weeks, right? Something crazy like that, and then he ended up playing through it forever, which probably wasn't the best idea in the world. But he's going to be out there. The beauty of this Indiana team is that if everyone was healthy, they would still all have fantasy value. The Nate McMillan offense, extremely high octane. They get it and they go. Victor Oladipo, first round fantasy year, number 11 overall by on a per game basis, I should say. 23 points, 5 boards, 4 assists, 2.3 steals. That was tops in the NBA. 0.8 blocks per game out of your guard spot. On 48% shooting and 80% at the free throw line. The only knock, I guess, is the 3 turnovers. But even that is really nothing for a guy doing as much as he did. Here's what concerns me about Oladipo. I don't know that there's any more room for improvement. I'm a little bit concerned about that particular mark. Could his scoring go up? I don't know. I honestly don't think so. Dude took 18 shots per game this year. There really wasn't anybody close on this team. Collison, 9. Miles Turner, 10. Thad, 10.5. Bojan, 10.5. So, Domantas Sabonis, 9. Lance Stevenson, 8.5. They spread the wealth around a little bit. But Victor Oladipo was the guy. He was the dude taking all the shots. Well, let's find out if anybody's off the payroll next year. Nope. Thad Young has a $13.5 million player option that I don't know if he's exercised it yet, but I imagine he will. The only dude that's probably coming off the payroll is Al Jefferson. Lance Steven has a $4 million team option. That's pretty affordable for a guy who played as much as he did. Big Al's making $10 million this coming year. I think the Pacers might shave that one off. They were already a very low payroll team because Oladipo was the only guy making significant money. So they've got some wiggle room. I don't know if they have the lure to go out there and get somebody. And obviously all of these things could change if Indiana changes their makeup. But they only had a $95 million payroll this last season. They were barely at the salary cap floor. They're slated to have a $75 million payroll this coming year. Although I think some of that is the Thad Young, so that may go up to 88 when they exercise his option. Regardless, they got flexibility. A lot of it. The following year, basically everybody comes off the payroll. So they may have to plan out a little bit how they want to do this thing. Miles Turner will be a restricted free agent that year. Thad, Boyan, Collison, Corey Joseph, Lance Stevenson all would come off the books 2019, 2020. But we're not there yet. Just saying they're going to be looking ahead a little bit. But this coming year, they have a lot of decent pieces, and they're all pretty darn affordable. For Oladipo, this was, by all accounts, the year that we were hoping he would have the previous season, but he just got Westbrooked right out of it. The steals were back in a big way. In fact, they were higher than ever. But that was something we always knew was a distinct possibility with Oladipo, right? He was getting yanked around by Scott Skiles in Orlando, and he was still putting up 1.7 steals and 0.8 blocks per game. That last year with the Magic, Oladipo was very good. He was right on the cusp of being an outstanding fantasy player. We figured this would be a bounce-back year that would put him maybe somewhere in that 2014-2015 range. But what we didn't see coming was the massive field goal percent jump. All the other stuff, okay, the steals were very high, even by Victor's standards. Let's say for a moment, we figured the steals would come back to, 1.6, 1.7. Maybe he could get as high as 1.8 or 1.9 if he was playing more minutes, which, not all that many more. But this is a dude that had never shot higher than 44.2% in his NBA career, and that came last year alongside Russell Westbrook. So Victor was presumably getting better looks, although we kind of know how that offense goes. And then all of a sudden this year, he goes to a new city, becomes the focal point of the offense, improves his shooting percentage by almost 4% over his career mark on 4 more shots per game, an extra half a three-pointer per game. By the way, he made 1% more of those. And his scoring, as a result, with 4 more shots and a 4% jump, leaps 7 points per game. So the scoring, way up. The field goal percent, way up. 3-point percent, outstanding. Career high in rebounds, career high in assists. Not even a career high in turnovers, by the way. He was actually slightly below his rookie season. Career high in steals, tied his career high in blocks. This, by the way, is why I'm a little bit concerned that there's nowhere left to go. When you look at his numbers from this season, legitimately, where could he be better? He ain't going to go higher than 48% from the field. This is the upper limit. He's probably not going to shoot better than 37% from downtown. I guess that number can fluctuate a little bit, but okay, maybe he could make an extra 0.2 3-pointers per game. It's a possibility. He could have a very good free throw shooting year that just sort of pops up, but he's never been higher than 83, and he's generally an 80%er. Throughout his career, that's where he's been. The rebounding probably won't get any better. Let's assume Miles Turner is actually healthier this coming year. I don't know. Does that help or hurt Oladipo's rebounding? We've seen Domantas Sabonis. He's sort of a rebound grabber. I don't think he's going higher than 5.2. Assists, this is probably where they are. Turnovers, I don't think you're going to shave too many off. Steals, I don't know how you match 2.4 a game. Could he really go higher than 0.8 blocks or 23 points per game? I don't think so. So I loved Victor Oladipo this season, coming off that clunker of a year in Oklahoma City. I don't really like him next year because I think you're going to have to overspend on him. You're going to see him drafted at the end of the first round, and I think he's probably going to have a mid-second round season. I think you're going to see a guy who comes in around probably number 17 this coming year. Not because of anything he does wrong, but just because things have a way of settling out a little bit. This was kind of a prove-it year for Victor. He was about as healthy as he's ever been. It's also worth noting. He only missed 7 games. If he can match that again, you definitely take it. I don't know how he possibly clears this particular landing spot. He did it. All the credit in the world. He did it. These were the things we were hoping would happen when we figured he was going to be underdrafted this season. Hey, he's got all these areas where he can make an improvement, and he did it, and then some. But that means the value's gone. So if he falls to you in the second round, I think you could take him mid to late second round and feel pretty confident that you're going to get a safe play. But if he's going at 9, 10, whatever, and you're looking for someone who's going to do that or better, he's probably not that guy. Just because he's probably never going to be a 90% foul shooter. You know, that's what would probably have to happen for him to make that next leap. Where else could it possibly come from? Shaving a turnover off of his game? That's not happening. Darren Collison, he'll be back with Indiana this coming season, and I see no reason why his role should change very much. He is your 9-category point guard of the year, probably. Okay, fine. Chris Paul basically always wins that award. But Darren Collison is your quiet 9-category point guard of the year because you look at his numbers and you think, oh, 12.5 points, 1.4 three-pointers, 2.5 rebounds, 5.3 assists, 1.3 steals, 0.2 blocks. All of those sound kind of The assists, I guess, are decent. The steals are okay. But then, wait a minute. 49.5% from the field, 89% at the free throw line, and 1.2 turnovers per game. He was brilliant in the percentages category and the turnover category. Brilliant. And so when you get a guy in that sort of Otto Porter-like vein, you have to feel pretty good about it. Here's the thing with Darren Collison, though. The free throw percent of 88.2, career high. The field goal percent, 49.5, career high. Three-point percentage, 46.8, career high by a lot. Although, he's always been pretty good, and he generally doesn't take that many. The rebounding, right around his career mark. The assist rate, pretty close to his career mark. Steals were up a little bit this year, back closer to what they were 3-4 years ago. I don't know if it was a health thing or just motivational. You could see that probably repeating itself. The other side of the coin with Darren Collison is that he was hurt for a while, and when he came back, he came off the bench behind Corey Joseph. So there are stretches that actually dragged his season averages down. Almost, you want to call it artificially, right? He missed about a month, 4 weeks, most of February. And then he came back, and he was playing a small role for about 2 weeks after that. So that depresses the number. But let's be clear here. Darren Collison, this is who he is. He is a high percentages guy who is never going to blow the roof off the building. And ended up as a top 50 fantasy player in 9-cat formats because he's good at steals, both percentages and turnovers. And he's fine at assists. Not great, but fine. So he's your classic 9-category guy who he was getting drafted in that probably 70 to 100 window and exceeded it because he was good in 5 out of 9 categories. But nobody pays attention to those categories. It's the 5 categories that nobody's watching. Steals, field goal percent, free throw percent, turnovers, and sort of assists. I mean, you almost couldn't craft a fantasy player that drew less attention than Darren Collison and ended up as a more valuable guy. Is there anybody else in the top 50 where you're just like, no, come on, no way? Quite like you are with Darren Collison. I'm sure there are some other guys in there where you're like, come on, but not quite to that extreme. And they're probably going to be near Collison, right? Because he's just inside the top 50. But to me, he's got to win that award for the, you're kidding, right? He's in the top 50 fantasy play of the year. Right? Because like Otto Porter, he was number 22. No one was surprised by that because he made 2 3-pointers a game and 15 points and 6 rebounds and 1.5 steals. some of his stuff actually stood out a little bit. Darren Collison, almost nothing he did stood out, but he did nothing wrong. And that is useful as a mid-round guy. So I think he'll probably be an okay draft pick again next year. I doubt people even realized how important he ended up being to this Indiana team as a stabilizing force. And I would venture to say people didn't realize simply how efficient he was. And the answer is very. Thad Young, you know I love him. I got the Thaditude, and nobody else does still. I was mocked relentlessly this year for my love of Thaddeus Young. He ended up as a number 69 player in fantasy sports. Top 70 on a per-game basis. A dude that played 81 out of 82 games. He was number 44 by totals this year. And by the way, he took the very last game of the season off. He did. But the 2 games prior to that, he only played the first half. So he actually could have played all 82. He would have been fine. And his averages were dragged down by 2 games where he only played 17 minutes. But Thaddeus Young is a brilliant defender from the power forward position. He was part of the reason that Indiana had such a legitimate shot to dethrone the king. 49% from the field. He actually increased his 3-pointers this year to 0.7, although that's not really why you're drafting him. In fact, I would have probably preferred he not take those 3-pointers and go back to shooting 52% like he did the year before. This was, by all accounts, a down shooting year for Thad Young, and he still ended inside the top 70. The 6 rebounds is probably about where it's going to be with Indiana. 2 assists, 1.7 steals. He's going to be in that 1.5 to 1.8 range as long as he's playing 30 minutes a night. And he'll get you just under half a block per game. He should be, barring, of course, a significant acquisition, basically the same dude next year. Can I really call him a sleeper again if he's been doing it? How long has he been in the NBA now? Since 2007? How can this guy be a sleeper? He's basically been the exact same fantasy player for the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years in a row, and still nobody thinks he's going to be a top 75 guy. He will be, guys. He will be. He always is. Very curious to see where he gets drafted. I got a feeling he's going to go in that same spot he always does, which is lower than he should. Bojan Bogdanovic, I'm not drafting. He's a scorer and nothing else. Domantas Sabonis, I'm not drafting because even when he was out there putting up fat popcorn numbers, his other stuff is miserable. He turns it over too much for a big man. He's not a great foul shooter. He doesn't steal. He doesn't block shots. He doesn't shoot the 3-pointer. He's a guy that sort of I don't call it a paper tiger because he's actually helpful for their team. But from a fantasy perspective, he's fairly uninteresting. He's like Enes Kanter, but he can't shoot free throws. And he's probably not going to play as much. Corey Joseph, no. Lance Stevenson, no. And, of course, we left one very important name for last, and that man is Miles Turner, who, by all accounts, had one of the top 3 most disappointing fantasy years out there. Depending on if you count Kawhi Leonard, you could almost give Miles Turner the number 1 slot. Miles, number 71 by totals, number 57 by averages. I can't give him that number 1 slot because there were dudes that just didn't play all year. And Miles Turner was probably a 2nd-round pick for you guys that ended up playing as a 5th or 6th-round pick. That's a pretty big shot to the gut. But Gordon Hayward, Kawhi Leonard, other guys in that 2nd round that ended up missing half the season. It felt, by the way, like Miles Turner missed more games than he did. He missed 17, so not even a quarter of the NBA year. But overall, his numbers were down in almost every single statistical category, and figuring out exactly why is a little bit of a guessing game. His scoring was down 1.8, his blocks were down 0.3, his steals were down 0.3, his rebounding was down by 1, his turnovers were up by 0.2, free throw percentage down by 3%, 3-pointer percentage about the same, Field goal percent, career low. That was down about 4 percentage points on one less shot per game this year. And he played 16 less games this season than last year. The question on Myles Turner now is this the new normal, or is this the one-off? We don't really have the kind of data backbone to say one way or the other. But I'm willing to take a chance and say this was a bad year for Myles Turner, but he should regress in a positive direction. He should be a bigger part of the offense on this Indiana team going forward. He should have better shooting percentage numbers going forward as, a team that's playing an up-tempo offense. I do think some of the field goal percentage issue was that he took an entire three-pointer more this year, but one shot less, right? He went from 10.5 to 9.5 shots per game, and he went from 1.5 to 2.5 three-pointers. So the percentage of threes that he took went from about 1.4 out of close to 11, so, somewhere between 10 and 15%, to 2.4 out of 9.8, which is almost a quarter of his shots came from downtown. That's too many. I know we're spreading the floor in the modern NBA, but get in there and dunk it. Just don't dunk it too hard or you might knock your arm out of its socket, like you did this season. I think there's a very reasonable chance Myles Turner gets back up to that 14 to 15 scoring territory. I don't know that the blocks will ever get back up and over 2 per game, but I do think there's a reasonable chance that they do. Steals, I think 0.9 his sophomore year was probably on the higher side. I think the 0.6 you saw from last year is more than likely a little closer to where he'll be. Rebounding, we should see that get up closer to 7, although, again, tough to say, right? I mean, rebounds are a little bit finicky, and he's not a natural rebounder. Field goal percent, that may never get back to 52 if he takes all these shots from downtown. He's a good foul shooter who just seemed like he had a little bit of a slightly off season. So I'm willing to take a chance on Myles Turner next year for no other reason than a lot of people basically said, I'm not willing to take a chance on Myles Turner. I've heard a lot of people say they're not willing to draft him regardless of where he goes. And I think that's a little bit short-sighted. I might not be able to convince you of this on one podcast. But what I will say is, it's a 1-year sample size on a guy who you can't really call injury-prone, right? It's not like this has been the case for 3 years in a row. He was quite healthy his second year in the NBA. He's shown that he can do it. This year was a weird one. Knocked in the dome, hurt his arm dunking, all these little things. The problem is it does start to snowball on you a little bit. We're all human, right? We talked about how the NBA has this mental health awareness program thing now. I think Myles Turner might be a good candidate to get in there and chat a little bit. Not that there's anything wrong with the dude, but think about it from your own personal standpoint. When 2 or 3 things go wrong in a row, don't you start to think that a 4th thing is coming? And that can impact how you play or how you operate in your daily life. And I do think some of that crept in with Myles Turner. I do think that as he got hurt the first time, and he thought, okay, I can handle this. He comes back, boom, hurt a second time, almost immediately. Then you start to think, oh boy, is this just not my year? Am I never going to get out of this funk? And he doesn't play as well. Domantas Sabonis is showing confidence. Myles Turner is showing a certain flakiness. But he's the guy for this team going forward. He's the center that they want to be their man. He's the big rim-protecting, three-point shooting center. Domantas Sabonis is a perfect candidate to come off the bench and go high energy, rebound his tail off, get a few pick-and-roll looks with somebody. But he's not the guy they want out there for 35 minutes a night. That's Myles Turner. That's his gig. He wasn't himself. I'm very curious to see what Myles' ADP looks like this coming season. Very curious to see where he's pre-ranked, right? He was pre-ranked 25 this year, and he often went earlier than that. I don't think either of those numbers is going to be that high this coming season. He was number 57, as we mentioned, by average. The way that he gets back up into that top 30 neighborhood is to get his free throw percentage back up, get his scoring back up, get his rebounding back up, get his shot blocking back up and over 2. Because the difference between 1.8 and 2.1 shot blocking is actually a pretty big deal. 0.3 per game. If you play the whole year, that's basically 27 extra blocks you're getting out of a guy. Go look at your league and see what 27 blocks might do for your fantasy team. The answer is a decent amount. That's probably a point for you. Do I think he's going to be a top 25 guy this coming year? No, I think maybe a lot of folks went too high on expectations. Remember, by the way, I was one of the people last offseason warning you to try not to buy the hype on Miles Turner. And of course, I ended up buying it. I bought the hype. But I thought he would struggle with a greater role. I didn't think it was going to be all this other kind of head Casey injury stuff. I just figured, look, if he's going to be a focal point, you're going to lose enough in field goal percent and turnovers and defense that a couple extra points is probably not going to do it for you. My hope is that Miles Turner realizes he doesn't need to be that big-time guy on offense, and he can settle into a more comfortable spot this coming season with a nice offseason to get a health back together. So I'm looking for a top 40 season from Miles Turner. I do think that there is a world where he could get back into the top 30. The question is, where is he going to get drafted? I'm perfectly comfortable drafting Miles Turner at 35 or later. I don't think I'd go any higher than that because you're kind of playing with fire. But I think that's probably where he's going to end up getting drafted this coming year. Where there is some upside, he has a chance to maybe go a round higher, but he could also end up a round or two lower. A little bit of a roll of the dice, but one that I'm willing to take, thinking that this last season was sort of the anomaly. And just think about what Indiana might be considering now. With the Raptors firing their head coach, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with this thing. What if LeBron James goes to the Western Conference? You don't think that Pacers team would want home court advantage in the East? They could sniff it at that point. But make no mistake, teams like the Wizards, the Bucks, they're going to be coming for those top 4 seeds. Raptors, Celtics, Sixers, those all seem like teams that are going to be there. The 4 seed becomes very much open. And if LeBron goes to the Sixers, the Cavs fall out, basically goes to anybody in the West or anybody in the East that isn't in the top 3. I guess he could stay in Cleveland. But even then, right, Pacers were only 2 games back of the 4 seed, so they're thinking about it. And you know that Miles Turner is going to want to play more games. They're going to want to be more comfortable together, and he's going to want to show everybody that this year was not who he is. So, the Pacers, a team that I already liked from a fantasy standpoint, still, to me, a team to look at for next year. I would be happy to end up with a bunch of them. The only one I probably won't end up with is Victor Oladipo, because I think he's basically the only Pacer that's going to get overdrafted. Adrian Benjamins, Dan Besbris on the show tomorrow. We'll talk about the next team in this Central Division. You'll just have to wait and find out who. This was the Pacers. A Pacers Monday, a Thaditude Monday. I'm your host, Dan Besbris, at Dan Besbris on Twitter. Hey, by the way, rate and review the podcast if you haven't done so already. I'm guessing most of you have, but do that via iTunes. That's the way that really helps. I also wanted to mention, by the way, went through some settings late last week. Every podcast now, not just Fantasy NBA Today, every Hoopball podcast will now be available on YouTube and Facebook. That's brand new here at Hoopball. If you like our Facebook page, I should have told you to do that earlier in the podcast, or subscribe to our YouTube channel. That is Hoopball. You can go to youtube.com/C/Hoopball. That's the name of the channel. It's just Hoopball. Then you can get access to all of our videos. Again, it's going to be Fantasy NBA Today, the Lakers podcast, the Kings podcast, Cause and Brew show, whatever other shows we may have in the wings here at Hoopball coming out. Same deal over at Facebook. Please do go like our Facebook page. You can get involved in discussions as we begin to kind of flesh out that social media part of our social media octopus over here. Again, I'm Dan Besbris for Fantasy NBA Today and Hoopball. Have a wonderful Monday, everybody. No games. I don't know what the hell we're going to do with ourselves. You know what? Happy baseball season, everyone. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.